Welcome to the Cozy Storytime, your peaceful space to unwind and relax. Before we start, make sure to subscribe and like the video for more cozy stories every night. So, where are you watching it from? And what are you doing right now? I hope you're comfortable, maybe tucked in with a warm drink or simply resting after a long day. Take a deep breath. Let go of any stress or worries. This is your time to drift away into a world of peace, where the only thing that matters is the gentle rhythm of your breath and the soft embrace of the night. Tonight, I have a story to share with you, one of journey and reflection, of wisdom and quiet endings. So, settle in and let the story carry you where you need to go. I hope you enjoy this story. The sea was quiet that morning, wrapped in a silver mist that clung to the wooden piers and the tall masts of elven ships like forgotten dreams. The tide rose in soft rhythm, whispering against the stone-lined shore. The air was thick with salt, with memory, and with an anticipation that no one could quite name. And there, beneath the pale sky, stood Gandalf the Grey, though now, after all his long journeys, they called him Gandalf the White. He stood at the edge of the dock in his long robes, staff in hand, his weathered face turned toward the horizon where the sea met the sky. His hair, once tangled and unruly from many battles and roads traveled, now shone clean and smooth in the sea breeze. His eyes, deep with the light of ancient stars, were not sad, nor even joyful, they were at peace. Behind him, the last of the elves were boarding the ship that would sail west, beyond the reach of mortal time. Galadriel walked with the quiet majesty of starlight, Celeborn beside her, and Elrond, ever noble and serene. Their presence did not weigh heavy upon the air, it lifted it. They moved like wind through tall grass, speaking in soft voices as they bade farewell to Middle-earth. The ship itself was unlike any made by mortal hands. Its hull gleamed with subtle runes that shimmered when the light struck them just so. The sails were spun from threads of moonlight and star silver, catching the breeze even before it came. It waited patiently, as if understanding the gravity of each footfall that approached it. Gandalf had no doubt that it was time. He had given all he could give. He had walked with the hobbits through darkness and fire, battled the great Balrog of Moria, guided kings and queens, challenged the will of Sauron himself. And when the One Ring was destroyed, and the realm of men restored to balance, he had stepped back, not with sorrow, but with quiet satisfaction. His purpose, long obscured and scattered like ash and wind, had finally become clear. He was not sent to defeat darkness with power, but to inspire others to rise against it. Still, as the tide began to shift, a small unease stirred within him. He turned slightly, his gaze shifting toward the hills that rose gently behind the harbor, and further still toward the east, where the light of morning had not yet fully touched the sky. It was then that he heard it, not with his ears, but with something deeper, older. A whisper, so faint that it might have been imagined. So quiet it could have been the memory of a whisper, long since past. Not yet, Mithrandir. He stood motionless, letting the words settle within him like snow on still water. No elf had spoken it. No mortal soul had even noticed anything amiss. Yet Gandalf knew that voice. Or rather, he knew what it meant. The Astari were not born of the world. They were sent from beyond, mere spirits of the undying lands, chosen not to rule, but to guide. 5 had come. Only 3 had stayed true. And now, the time had come to return home, had it not? He breathed deeply and turned to face the sea once more, It stretched out before him, vast and endless, serene and calling. His heart ached for it, not in longing, but in a way one might yearn for a song half remembered. The call of Valinor was not a demand, it was a promise. Of peace, of rest, of reunion. He had earned it. But the whisper would not leave him. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Certain the shipwright, ever watchful, ever wise. His long beard, silvery as the sea foam, moved slightly with the breeze. He placed a hand gently on Gandalf's shoulder. "The ship is ready," Certain said, his voice calm as the ocean tide. Gandalf nodded but did not step forward. "I hear something," he murmured. Certain's eyes searched his friend's face. "From where?" "The east." Certain paused. "The east is always restless, Mithrandir. It is in their nature. Yet you are not bound to it any longer." "No," Gandalf said quietly, "but I am not yet free of it." A silence passed between them, long and undisturbed. Then Certain slowly withdrew his hand. "If your heart tells you to wait, then wait. The ships will always sail when the sea is ready." Gandalf smiled faintly, grateful for the elf's understanding. "I thought I would feel certainty in this moment. That when the end came, I would know. But I do not. Not quite." "Perhaps this is not your end," Certain said simply. Gandalf turned then, walking slowly back down the dock, his staff making a soft tap with each step. He passed Elrond, who offered a small nod, eyes full of knowing. Galadriel said nothing, but her gaze followed him with quiet wisdom and perhaps even sorrow. She, more than any, understood the weight of unseen burdens. Shadowfax awaited him beyond the harbor, grazing in a field of soft grass beneath the dappled shade of an old willow. The gray horse raised his head at once, ears flicking as Gandalf approached. "We may have one more journey yet," Gandalf said aloud, brushing the creature's mane. Shadowfax neighed softly in reply, as if he had always known. Gandalf mounted, robes billowing gently as he took his place upon the steed. He looked once more at the sea, the ship, the elves. Then he turned his eyes eastward, toward forests unwalked, lands unknown, and echoes yet to be understood. The sky above lightened slightly as the sun reached higher, casting a warm glow over the harbor and the hills. Gandalf did not ride fast. There was no need for haste. Whatever awaited him would still be there when he arrived. Behind him, the sea continued its quiet rhythm, the ship remained in gentle wait, and the mist began to drift, carried slowly westward. And so began the last journey of Gandalf, not one of battle or prophecy, but of listening. Of following a call that only he could hear. A call that would lead him far beyond even the memory of the War of the Ring. A call into the quiet places of the world where even legends dare not walk. But not yet toward the west. Not yet. The morning sun had climbed only a little higher when Gandalf and Shadowfax left the last sight of Grey Havens behind them. The gentle sound of gulls faded into memory, replaced by the softer music of the wind brushing through the hills of Lindon. They moved without fanfare, without any declaration or escort, just a wizard in white and a horse too proud to be tamed, traveling alone down a path that no one else had known to look for. There was a stillness to the land that Gandalf had not felt in many years. Since the defeat of Sauron and the destruction of the One Ring, Middle-earth had quieted in ways both subtle and profound. The road no longer trembled with the sound of marching armies. The forest whispered only of birdsong and growing things. Even the shadows beneath the mountains seemed to rest easier now, no longer disturbed by the tremors of war. And yet, something in the east stirred. Gandalf did not ride quickly. He had learned long ago that haste rarely brought clarity. Shadowfax moved as though he shared his master's patience, his strides long and powerful, covering miles with graceful ease. They passed old paths now overgrown, once traveled by elves on their way westward, now reclaimed by wildflowers and quiet moss. Here and there, ruins poked through the underbrush, fallen watchtowers, withered stones carved with forgotten runes, echoes of a time when vigilance was the price of survival. But now there was peace. Or at least, the shape of it. Still, the whisper remained. It did not return as a voice exactly, not like the one he'd heard at Grey Havens, but as a presence, as a pull just beneath thought. Like a tide deep below the surface of a calm sea, it tugged at his spirit gently but insistently. Eastward, always eastward. They crossed the Brandywine River under a quiet dusk. Gandalf paused at the ferry crossing, looking southward toward the Shire, though he did not enter it. He could almost see the green hills of Hobbiton and the lights in Baggins' round windows. He thought of Frodo, now sailing far beyond mortal shores, and of Sam, still tending to the earth with callous hands and a hopeful heart. For a long moment, Gandalf simply watched the wind ripple through the willows by the bank and said nothing. He smiled softly. The world was healing. That much was clear. And yet healing did not always mean completeness. Some things took longer. Some paths led further. By the time they reached the open fields of Rohan, the stars were bright above, scattered like shards of ancient crystal across the dark velvet sky. Shadowfax galloped over the plains like a spirit of wind and fire, his hooves never seeming to touch the ground. The moon cast long shadows behind them, stretching westward as they pressed east. Edoras stood quiet upon its hill. From a distance, Gandalf could see the golden roof of Medusel glint faintly in the moonlight. He did not ride up the long path to its gates, for there was no need. Eomer ruled now with wisdom and strength, and peace had settled like a gentle rain over the Rittermark. Still, Gandalf paused just long enough to whisper words into the breeze, an old tome, older than the Rohirrim themselves, of thanks and farewell. It was as he passed into the lands near Fangorn Forest that something began to change. The trees here were always older, always watchful. They had seen much, more than they spoke of, and they rarely stirred for anything less than wonder or war. But as Gandalf approached the forest's edge, a hush seemed to fall across the earth. Even Shadowfax slowed, ears pricked, eyes narrowing slightly. Not in fear, but in awareness. The forest was not angry. It was listening. Gandalf dismounted and stepped quietly beneath the branches. The air within Fangorn was thicker, cooler. The scent of bark and loam filled his senses, mingled with something older, something deeper. He walked without haste, letting the rhythm of the trees guide his feet. Shadows danced across his robe, though there was no wind to move the leaves above. Then, from behind an ancient oak, a pair of amber eyes appeared. Treebeard. The old Ent stepped forward with the slowness of ages, moss draped across his arms like robes, his face lined with wisdom and patient memory. He looked down at Gandalf with a gaze like deep water and let out a long, rumbling breath. Gandalf, Treebeard said, his voice a creaking groan of bark and stone. I thought you had gone west with the others. I had intended to, Gandalf replied, his tone gentle. But something calls me eastward. Something I do not yet understand. Treebeard tilted his gray head, the leaves in his beard rustling softly. The east has always been troublesome. We Ents do not go that way. No, Gandalf agreed. But I must. There was silence then, filled only by the distant creak of branches and the soft shifting of roots beneath the forest floor. Be wary, Treebeard said at last. There are things even the trees have forgotten. Some grow again when the light dims. Gandalf bowed his head slightly. Thank you, old friend. I will tread carefully. They spoke no further. Words between such beings were rare and never wasted. Gandalf nodded Shadowfax once more and rode along the forest's edge until the woods fell behind them. The land grew flatter, quieter. The grass was taller, the sky wider, and the stars brighter. Still eastward, always eastward. Days passed, though they slipped by like ripples on water, unnoticed. Gandalf did not tire, though he rested when the mood struck him. He shared bread with shepherds in the wold, drank from clear rivers that ran unspoiled, and watched the sunrise with the silent joy of one who has known too many dark nights. The world was beautiful again, but beauty often hid the things that grew in silence. One night, while camped beneath a crumbling stone arch, the remains, perhaps, of some old outpost of Gondor, he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in a field of ash beneath a starless sky. The wind carried no scent, no sound, only stillness. And in that stillness, he saw a figure in the distance, not formed of flesh or shadow, but of absence itself. A hole in the world, shaped like a man. It raised a hand, but not to strike. It beckoned. When he awoke, the fire was cold. The whisper had returned. Stronger this time. Come. Gandalf looked eastward. The sky was pale with the first blush of morning. Shadowfax stirred nearby, ready. There was no fear in him, only resolve. He knew now that whatever called him was not simply a leftover whisper from the old wars. This was something else. Something that had slept through the ages, unnoticed, untouched. But no longer. And so, the wizard rode on, into lands where maps grew vague, and stories grew thin. Into the east, where the last test of Mithrandir waited. The land grew stranger as Gandalf pressed further eastward. What once had been gentle slopes and familiar forests slowly transformed into unfamiliar terrain, as though the very earth had changed its memory of the world. Hills rolled higher, covered in a thick grass that swayed like waves in a forgotten sea. The trees here were sparser, more gnarled, crooked oaks and birches with pale bark and few leaves, their branches clawing silently at the sky. The paths were no longer marked by stone or story, only the faint trace of animal tracks and windswept trails. Shadowfax moved without hesitation, though Gandalf could feel the tension in the horse's gait. They both knew they were stepping beyond the bounds of what most called Middle-earth, into places that the West had long since abandoned to their own fate. For the first time in weeks, Gandalf heard no birdsong. It was not that the land was dead. Life still moved. He caught glimpses of red-eyed foxes darting through brambles, and once, the glint of something larger, watching from the ridge of a distant hill. But there was a silence beneath the surface of things, as if the very wind was holding its breath. One evening, Just as the sun bled into the horizon in smears of gold and crimson, he came upon a village. Or rather, the remains of one. The wooden huts had long collapsed, their frames warped by time and weather. Fireplaces sat cold and cracked beneath open skies. Weeds grew where hearths once burned, and fences lay rotted and scattered like fallen bones. But it was not age alone that had undone this place. Gandalf could sense it. Something had emptied it, and long before nature had its way. He dismounted and moved slowly through the ruins, his staff lightly tapping the dry ground. He passed a broken cart, a child's wooden toy lying half buried nearby. The houses bore no signs of siege, no scorched stone, no blood. Only absence. He reached the center of the village, where a stone well stood. Its rope was frayed and dangling, the bucket missing. Something about the well gave him pause. He approached and peered into its depths. It was dry, bone dry, not even the scent of damp earth. And yet, there it was again. The whisper. Not from the east this time, but from below. He closed his eyes and listened, not just with his ears, but with that deeper sense that he had carried since the days before Middle-earth knew his name. He sees you now. Gandalf opened his eyes. The wind had picked up slightly, scattering dust around the well. He stood very still, letting the moment pass through him. He did not speak, nor answer. Some messages were best left unanswered. That night he made a fire a safe distance from the village and sat with his cloak wrapped around his shoulders. Shadowfax rested nearby, head lowered, but alert. Gandalf stared into the flames for a long time. He thought of Saruman. There had once been 5 of them, the Astari. Messengers from the west, clothed in flesh to guide the peoples of Middle-earth. But power had seduced Saruman. Pride had claimed him long before Sauron ever offered his hand. Gandalf had tried to save him, even to the end, but Saruman had chosen his path. And Radagast, kind, foolish Radagast, had wandered so far into the woods that he forgot why he came. Only Gandalf had remained faithful to the task. Or so he had thought. But now, the call was not from Valinor. It came from the east. From something older than even the mission of the Astari. Older than Sauron. And it knew his name. He sees you now. The next day brought him into the wide plateau lands of Run. Very few maps marked these territories, and those that did often offered only vague notations, unknown tribes, wastes, mountains of the red sky. The people here had been shaped by the shadow from the west for centuries. Many had once served Sauron, not out of devotion, but out of fear, or worse, reverence. And yet, these people were not evil. Gandalf knew this. He had walked among them in earlier days under different names, listening to their songs, hearing their stories. They had once looked at him with awe and suspicion, calling him Alatar or Palando, names whispered in tongues long lost. And now, they looked at him again. It began in the 3rd village he passed. A child saw him first, her eyes wide, clutching a bundle of dry sticks. She did not run, only watched. When Gandalf smiled, she said nothing, only dropped her bundle and ran back into the thatched hut. Moments later, an old man stepped out. His back was bent, his beard white with dust and years. He leaned heavily on a carved staff, though it was nothing like Gandalf's. He approached with slow, deliberate steps. You, the man said in a rough dialect. You are the one from the stories. Gandalf inclined his head. I have been many things in many stories. They say you came once, long ago, with robes of blue. Gandalf's breath caught. He had not worn blue in an age. Not since the early days, when he and another had traveled far into the east, Alatar, his brother in spirit. Yes, he said softly. That was a long time ago. The old man's eyes searched his. Then it is true. The shadow stirs again. Not Sauron. Something deeper. Gandalf's jaw tightened. What do you know of it? Dreams, the elder whispered. Voices in the dark. The wells run dry, the birds no longer sing. And some among us wake with eyes that are no longer their own. He paused. They speak of a temple. In the desert beyond the Red Mountains. Buried in sand. It calls to them. A silence fell between them. Gandalf nodded slowly. Thank you. That is where I must go. The old man raised his staff in a silent farewell. By nightfall, Gandalf rode toward the eastern horizon once more, the moon rising behind him. The land darkened ahead, silhouetted by jagged mountains and swirling sands. The Red Mountains, long thought met by the west, stood as a jagged scar on the edge of the world. Somewhere beyond them lay the temple. And within the temple, something waited. Something that saw him now. Gandalf rode into the dark without fear, only resolve. For whatever ancient thing had awakened in the east, he would meet it. And he would meet it not as a servant of fire, or of war, or even of Valinor. He would meet it as Gandalf, the last of the Astari. For 3 days and 3 nights, Gandalf and Shadowfax traversed the boundary lands of Run, following the shape of the Red Mountains etched faintly on the eastern horizon. These peaks were older than the kingdoms of men, older even than the earliest songs of the elves. In all the long years of Middle-earth's histories, few had dared cross them, and fewer still returned to speak of what they had found. The land began to lose its green as they rode. The soil grew coppery, rust-red with the minerals bleeding from the bones of the world. Trees thinned until they were nothing more than thorny bushes, and then those, too, disappeared. What remained was dust, stone, and the endless breath of the wind. Shadowfax moved steadily despite the harsh terrain. No ordinary horse would have lasted a day in these lands, but he was no ordinary beast. His hooves found purchase on sharp rocks, his strength unbroken by the rising heat. Yet even he began to grow quiet, his ears twitching at things unseen. The first true test came with the wind. It began subtly, a change in its tone, a murmur buried beneath its natural whistle. Gandalf paused on a narrow ridge where the mountains began to rise in earnest. Before them stretched a great canyon, cut like a wound into the earth, and beyond it, the peaks loomed like silent sentinels. He listened. The wind carried voices. Not clear, not loud. Like echoes from a long-forgotten battle, or prayers whispered in a language lost to time. He closed his eyes and tilted his head, letting the sounds filter through his being. They were not malevolent. Not yet. But they were mourning. The wind here remembers, he murmured. He guided Shadowfax down into the canyon, the path narrow and treacherous. The walls of rock on either side were streaked with red and black, and the silence below the rim pressed in like a weight. The air thickened with each step downward, until even the sky above seemed farther away. At the canyon's base, Gandalf dismounted. He let his hand touch the stone wall beside him. Cold. Not with the chill of air, but of spirit. A deep, ancient stillness that lived in the marrow of the mountain. He moved forward on foot, Shadowfax following silently. Halfway through the gorge, they came upon the first markings. Carvings in the rock, spirals, runes, eyes without pupils. Some were chiseled with care, others clawed into the stone as if by desperate hands. He studied them, brushing dust away with the tip of his staff. One symbol he recognized, barely. It was a sign once used in the Far East to mean gate or veil. The veil between worlds. A warning. Or an invitation. Night came quickly in the shadow of the peaks. Gandalf made camp near a rock formation that gave them shelter from the wind. The stars were strange here, scattered differently across the sky, and the moon's light cast the mountains in deep, unnatural reds. As the fire burned low, the whisper returned. It came not from the east now, nor from beneath, but from within. A dream, or perhaps a memory. He stood again in Valinor, under the silver trees, before the voice of the One. Not with ears, but with his soul, he had received the call that first brought him to Middle-earth. He had accepted it freely, in the name of wisdom and service, choosing humility where others sought glory. And yet, you were not sent to understand all things. The voice again. Not the ones, but something else. Something that had been waiting for him to reach this very place. You were sent to hold back the dark. But what if the dark is not done? He woke with a start. The fire was out. Shadowfax stood, mane bristling, eyes fixed on the path ahead. A figure stood at the far end of the canyon. Tall, thin, cloaked in rags that billowed despite the still air. No face visible beneath the hood. It did not move. It only watched. Gandalf stood slowly, staff in hand. He said nothing. The figure slowly raised one arm and pointed toward the mountains. Then it vanished, not in a swirl of smoke or flash of light, but as if it had never been there at all. He did not sleep again that night. By the time the morning came, soft and red as blood, Gandalf had already begun the ascent into the Red Mountains. The path was cruel, jagged stone, sudden drops, and trails that wound in circles if not walked with purpose. But the wizard did not falter. Each step seemed to draw from him memories he had not touched in centuries. He remembered crossing the misty mountains with Bilbo, and the narrow passes where stone giants hurled boulders in play. He remembered the fire in Moria, and the fall that nearly ended him. He remembered standing upon the high places of the world and feeling the breath of time sweep past his robes. But this place was not like the others. It did not belong to the same world. Somewhere near the summit, the wind died entirely. Silence returned, but not peaceful. It was a silence that listened. And there, on the highest ridge, Gandalf saw it. The temple. Not large, not grand. Half buried in red dust and ash, carved directly into the face of the mountain. Its columns were cracked, its entrance choked by fallen stone. But something about it, its shape, its presence, was wrong. Not evil, but outside. As if it had been placed here not by hands, but by will. Shadowfax whinnied, uneasy. Gandalf touched his neck gently. "Not yet," he whispered. "Wait here." He stepped forward alone. At the threshold of the temple, he paused. Carvings lined the outer walls, symbols like those in the canyon, but clearer now. He could see scenes, figures bowing before stars, a great eye watching from behind a veil, and in the center, a being of light and shadow, arms outstretched. Not Sauron. Not Morgoth. Something else. He placed his hand on the stone, and the rock pulsed beneath his palm, once, gently, like a heartbeat. He drew in a slow breath and stepped into the darkness. The air inside was dry, untouched for ages. Dust hung in the light of his staff like tiny stars. The corridor sloped downward into the heart of the mountain, and with each step, the whisper grew clearer. "Come deeper." The stones bore no signs of decay. They were ancient, yes, but preserved as if time dared not touch them. The walls narrowed, the air thickened, and at the end of the corridor, he saw it. A door of black stone, smooth and unbroken. Upon its surface, a single symbol, the same eye without a pupil. Waiting. He reached out. The stone beneath his fingertips felt warm. And then, a voice, not a whisper this time, but a word. Mithrandir. Spoken in his mind. Deep and echoing. He stepped back, breath caught. It knew him. Not just his name. It knew him. The test had not yet begun. But it was coming. And he was not alone. The door did not open at Gandalf's touch. It did not resist him either. It simply remained still, utterly unmoved, as though it acknowledged his presence but was not yet compelled to yield. The black stone pulsed faintly beneath his fingers, as if alive, but offered no clear invitation forward. That, in itself, was unusual. Most dark places in Middle-earth had a hunger to them, a desire to draw in, devour, ensnare. This was different. This door was waiting. And so, Gandalf waited too. He stepped back and took in the space surrounding him, the narrow corridor of ancient stone, the perfect silence, the way his own breathing seemed louder than it ought to be. He could feel the world thinning here, like a mist stretched too far. Something pressed against the edges of this place, something vast, something buried. He had encountered many powerful things in his long years. Spirits both dark and radiant. Beings older than the sun, remnants of the first music. But this presence, it stirred differently. Not like a conqueror seeking dominion, nor like a servant awaiting command. It felt, in a strange way, like a mirror. It saw him not as an intruder, but as something familiar. He sat, cross-legged, before the black door and placed his staff across his lap. His hands rested lightly over the gnarled wood as he closed his eyes and let his thoughts settle. Not into sleep, no, there would be no dreams tonight, but into a state beyond distraction. A slow opening of his inner senses. Then he spoke, not aloud, but with the voice of thought, the way the Vala had once communicated in the time before speech. I am Gandalf the Grey. Once Olorin. I come not in pride or conquest, but in search of what stirs beyond this veil. The air answered, not with a voice, but with a sensation. Recognition. As though a deep breath had been drawn somewhere behind the door. You have carried fire, came the reply, without sound. You have spoken to trees. You have walked in shadow and been reborn. You have held the ring and not taken it. You are known. Gandalf did not flinch. Then you know I do not come to dominate, only to understand. A pause, long and deep. Then understand this, you are late. The door shuddered, just once, a low tremble beneath the mountain floor. Gandalf rose slowly, gripping his staff. Dust drifted from the ceiling as the stone slab before him split, not from the center, but downward, like a mouth yawning open. Beyond lay darkness. No torches, no glow from ancient stones. Only a deep, swallowing black. He stepped forward without fear. Inside was not a chamber, but a vast cavern, so wide that the edges vanished into shadow, and so tall that even the echo of his footfalls took time to return. He raised his staff, and its light grew brighter, casting a soft silver glow across the floor. It was not stone beneath him, not earth. It was glass, perfectly smooth, black as the void, and reflective. He looked down and saw not only his face, but images, fragments, rippling beneath the surface. Moments from his life, Frodo asleep in Rivendell, Bilbo laughing by the hearth in Bag End, a flash of fire in the caverns of Moria. Each memory flickered, then faded. He continued onward. Far ahead, in the center of the chamber, a single pedestal rose from the floor. Upon it sat a sphere of dark crystal, small and unassuming. Unlike the Palantiri, this orb gave off no light. It seemed to absorb the glow from his staff, casting shadows where there should have been none. He approached it cautiously. When he was near enough, he felt it, a pressure in the air, like standing beside the sea before a storm. The presence he had sensed since crossing the mountains now filled the chamber. And then, for the first time, the voice spoke aloud. "Why have you come, Olorin?" It was a soft voice. Neither male nor female. Neither kind nor cruel. It carried the weight of eons, yet it spoke without haste. Gandalf answered, his voice calm but clear. "Because the wind has changed. Because dreams turn strange and wells run dry. Because something stirs in the east and it calls my name. You seek to stop it? I seek to know if it must be stopped." A silence fell. Then, the sphere began to glow, just faintly. Within its depths, shapes moved. Not visions, but feelings. Sorrow. Loneliness. A vast expanse of time spent in silence. "You know of the first music," the voice said. "You know how the world began. What was sung into being, and what was left unsung." Gandalf narrowed his eyes. "You are one of the forgotten." "Not forgotten," it replied. "Abandoned." The floor beneath him shimmered again. This time, he saw images not from his own life, but from before memory. Shapes of light and shadow, forming and unforming, dancing in the void before the world was made. And among them, one who stood apart. Watching, not singing. "I was given no name," it said. "I was not chosen to take form or guide the children. I was not summoned to Valinor. I remained behind in what was left unshaped." Gandalf's breath slowed. He understood now. "You are the echo of the music not sung. I am the possibility that was never chosen. The path untaken. And now, the world forgets me. but the world is incomplete. Gandalf stepped closer to the sphere. And so you call to those who dream, who remember the old songs. Not to rule, the voice said. To return. To be acknowledged. The west sealed its gates. The east remembers. You stand between. The chamber quieted again. The meaning of his journey lay bare. This was not a new enemy, nor a servant of darkness. It was a truth long denied. And yet, the danger remained, not of war, but of imbalance. For even an echo, if left unheeded long enough, can turn to a scream. Gandalf laid his hand gently on the orb. You are not forgotten, he said, voice low. But you must not break the world to be remembered. The glow dimmed. I do not wish to break it. Only to be heard. To be part of the music again. Gandalf closed his eyes. Then he did something rare. He sang. Not with grandeur or power, but with the quiet voice of one who had once listened to stars being born. A simple tune, soft and imperfect, filled the chamber. And as he sang, the orb pulsed gently, in rhythm. Not a weapon. Not a threat. A note in need of harmony. The chamber shimmered. Not with light, but with stillness and agreement. And then, the voice faded. Not gone, but at peace. Gandalf turned and left the cavern. The black door closed behind him, silent once more. When he emerged, the sun was rising behind the red mountains, painting the sky with streaks of gold. Shadowfax was waiting, calm. Gandalf mounted, and together they rode westward. But as they descended, the wizard turned once more to the horizon behind him, to the mountains and the cavern and the echo he had met. Something had changed. The world was not finished. And neither was he. The red mountains faded slowly behind him, softened by the haze of early morning in memory. Though the weight of what he had encountered still clung to his robe like lingering mist, Gandalf rode with a renewed stillness. He had not expected to find peace within the echo of a forgotten presence, nor had he expected to offer it. Yet peace, as it often did, revealed only new paths, not conclusions. Shadowfax moved steadily westward, bearing them toward a strip of dark land few ever crossed and fewer still remembered. It was not marked on any recent map of Middle-earth. The Hollow Forest, as it was called in old speech, had no known borders. It simply began where the light thinned and the wind ceased to sing. Gandalf had once glimpsed it in a dream long ago, during the days of the White Council, when the world was stirring from the shadows of Dol Guldur. He had forgotten it since. Now, it stood before him. The trees began subtly. Not the towering, proud trees of Fangorn, nor the golden majesty of Lothlorien. These were squat, ash-colored things, their bark smooth and lifeless, as if carved from bone rather than grown. Their leaves were dark and dry, whispering not with the breath of life, but the quiet rustle of things left behind. Shadowfax halted at the edge. Gandalf dismounted, laying a gentle hand on the horse's flank. I will go on foot from here, he said softly. Wait, as you have always waited. I shall return, one way or another. The gray horse did not move. His eyes, full of intelligence, met the wizard's with something close to concern. Gandalf nodded once, then stepped between the trees. At first, the hollow forest was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that hinted at the absence of song. Even the crunch of his boots against the forest floor seemed to dissolve into the air too quickly, as if the land were swallowing all sound. The trees stood at irregular angles, crooked like limbs bent by age. Some had no branches. Others reached for the sky in shapes too deliberate to be natural. There were no birds, no insects, not even the scurrying of unseen beasts. It was as though the forest existed outside the rhythm of the world. And yet, Gandalf did not fear it. He moved with quiet curiosity, letting the atmosphere settle around him like a cloak. The staff in his hand pulsed with a faint light, gentle, steady. He did not will it to glow. It did so on its own, as if the forest required it. A short time passed, though in the hollow forest, time itself seemed hesitant, and he came upon the first sign. A stone chair, half buried in moss and earth, sat beneath a tree with no leaves. It was too large for a man, too ornate for a woodland throne. Its back curled upward like smoke, and along its arms were carvings of faces, stern, hollow-eyed, worn by wind. He paused beside it and reached out. The stone was warm. As his fingers brushed its edge, a memory flickered, not his own, but the forest's. A gathering. Figures robed in pale green and black. Not elves, not men. Something older. They did not speak. They listened to the forest, to the silence, to the turning of the world. The hollow forest had once been a sanctuary. A place for those who no longer belonged anywhere else. Gandalf whispered a small blessing in Quenya, not knowing if any spirit remained to hear it. He moved on. As he ventured deeper, the forest began to shift, not in form, but in feeling. The air grew heavier, not with threat, but with memory. Every step seemed to awaken something, not hostile, not awake exactly, but aware. He came upon more remnants. A broken circle of stones, arranged with care but fractured by time. A tree grown around a rusted lantern, its metal nearly fused with the bark. And then, a figure. Not moving. A statue. She stood beneath a willow, though the tree bore no leaves. Her form was cloaked, her hands outstretched, and her face veiled by time. The stone was cracked, weathered, and covered in tiny glyphs etched over centuries. It was the Lady of the Hollow. Gandalf approached her with reverence. The tales of her were faint echoes in old elvish poems of a spirit who wandered the border of Arda, neither Maya nor mortal, said to offer comfort to those forgotten by the Vala. No one had seen her in the ages since the fall of the lamps. He reached forward and touched her hand. A soft breeze stirred the air. Not from above, but from the earth. His eyes closed. He saw children with silver eyes singing to the stars. He saw a fireless world, quiet and serene. He saw grief, not his own, but collective, ancient, patient. And then he saw her. Not the statue, but her true form. Pale as the moon on snow, with eyes like mirrors. She stood not in dominance, but in grace. She did not speak. She offered her hands. Gandalf bowed his head. No words were needed. The moment passed. When he opened his eyes, the forest seemed lighter. Still quiet, but gentler. The air no longer pressed, it breathed. He continued on. By evening, he found the glade. A wide circle, devoid of trees. In the center, a pool of still water, black as night but clear as glass. Around its edge were stones arranged in a perfect ring, each one bearing a different sigil. Above it, the sky opened for the first time in days, revealing stars unfamiliar and unmoving. This was the heart of the hollow. He sat beside the pool, his staff resting across his knees. A voice came then, not from the forest, not from memory, but from within. Why do you carry the burden still? He did not answer. The world is changed. The shadow is lifted. The war is ended. Why do you not rest? He looked into the pool and saw himself, not as he was now, but as Alarin, cloaked in light, eyes wide with compassion, yet burdened by the threads of fate. I do not carry the burden for glory, he said aloud, nor for duty, but because even in peace, the work of healing endures. The pool rippled, then settled. A voice, soft as a leaf falling, answered, Then rest tonight, great pilgrim. You are welcome here. For the first time in weeks, Gandalf lay down without tension in his chest. The forest watched, not with suspicion, but with the eyes of one who remembers and forgives. The stars above did not move. The pool did not ripple. And sleep came to the wizard not as escape, but as grace. Dawn did not come to the hollow forest in the ordinary way. There was no fanfare of birdsong, no gilding of the treetops by golden light. Instead, the silence softened. The shadows, once heavy and still, began to retreat, slowly, respectfully, as if yielding their vigil to the world beyond. The pool at the heart of the hollow remained dark, but no longer ominous. It had become still water, quiet and deep, no longer a mirror of forgotten grief. Gandalf opened his eyes not with urgency but with a calmness rare even for him. He had slept through the night without dreams. That in itself was a marvel. For all his wisdom and power, his sleep had long been a thin and troubled thing, filled with echoes of old songs, warning cries from the east, and voices of those long gone. But here, in this ancient forest, even memory had let him rest. He sat up slowly, the stiffness in his joints a gentle reminder that this body, gray-bearded, withered, mortal in its shape, still bore the cost of walking in Middle-earth. Yet he felt light. Not unburdened, but momentarily aligned. In rhythm with something older than time. The forest had changed overnight. Where once the trees had leaned like mourners, now they stood upright, their branches fuller. A faint breeze stirred their leaves, whispering in voices almost too soft to discern. The stones around the glade shimmered faintly with dew. Gandalf rose and retrieved his staff, which had dimmed during the night. As his hand gripped it, the crystal atop the gnarled wood glowed faintly again, a reassurance, not of power, but presence. He turned to leave, walking back through the trees that had once seemed so hollow. Now they greeted him, not with sound or gesture, but with acceptance. The forest was no longer merely observing him. It had received him. At its edge, Shadowfax waited. The great horse stood still as a statue, his breath rising gently in the cool morning air. As Gandalf approached, the steed gave a soft whinny, pressing his head lightly against the wizard's shoulder. I've kept you waiting longer than I intended, Gandalf murmured, running his fingers through the silvery mane. But there was much to remember here. He mounted, and they rode west once more. Now the land changed more swiftly. The ground grew firmer, the wind carried scents of water and pine, and the horizon grew bright with each passing mile. Yet Gandalf did not ride toward the coast, not yet. His journey would soon end at the Grey Havens, but one path remained. One ember that had long smoldered quietly within him, never extinguished. The flame imperishable. It had been gifted to him in the beginning, before time took shape. All the Astari carry a portion of it, some more openly than others. Saruman had spoken of it with pride, Radagast with indifference. But Gandalf had carried it quietly, not as a torch to burn, but as a lantern in the dark. A reminder of purpose, of renewal. And now, it stirred again. For beyond the forests and the rivers, nestled in a forgotten vale of Eriador, lay a place few remembered. Not a city, nor a tower, nor any landmark of stone or steel. It was simply called Calanhir, a hollow hill, buried beneath ivy and moss, where once the Maya had walked in secret before the shaping of the elven cities. A place of silence and fire. He had not returned there in an age. And now it called to him. By evening, the road narrowed into a deer trail. Shadowfax slowed, weeding carefully through thick hedges and fallen stones. The trees here were old, but not heavy. Their leaves shimmered with late spring light, and the air was filled with the faint scent of rosemary and crushed thyme. At last, they came to a wide clearing, carpeted in golden moss. At its center rose a low hill, almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but unmistakable to one who knew what it hid. Calanhir. Gandalf dismounted and approached the hill on foot. He traced a spiral in the moss with the tip of his staff, and the earth responded, not with an opening or rumble, but with a breath. A single stone rolled aside, revealing a narrow stairway descending into the ground. He stepped inside. The chamber beneath Calanhir was small and circular, its walls smooth and lit by a soft, flickering glow. There were no torches. The light came from the air itself, from veins of crystal in the stone, pulsing with an ancient rhythm. At the center stood a brazier of white stone, unlit. This was the Ember Well, the last remnant of the flame imperishable as it had been given to the Maya. He approached the brazier and stood over it. His staff dimmed, as if to honor the presence of a greater light not yet kindled. Here, words were unnecessary. He breathed deeply and let his thoughts settle, not on the world, or the wars, or the choices made in council chambers and battlefields, but on the thread that had run through it all. The spark that had driven him forward, even when wearied by doubt. He raised both hands, and in his palms appeared a faint shimmer of gold, no brighter than a firefly's glow, but steady. It was not magic in the usual sense. It was not a spell. It was remembrance. A thread of what he had once been before form and time had wrapped him in flesh. He let the shimmer fall gently into the brazier. Nothing happened for a long moment. Then the flame came. Soft at first, a warm glow rising like mist. Then brighter, flickering, singing without sound. It danced not wildly but with dignity, changing color from gold to silver to a hue not seen in any forge or hearth. Gandalf did not look away. This was the source. The true fire. Not destruction. Not domination. Creation. Renewal. Hope. He sat beside the brazier and let the warmth settle into his bones. The flame did not burn. It cradled. As he watched it, his thoughts grew still, not erased, but at peace. Here, the journey's weight lifted. Not forgotten, just understood. Time passed unmarked in the chamber. Hours or days, he could not tell. But when the flame finally dimmed, it did not vanish. A single spark remained in the brazier, glowing steadily. It would remain there for others, should any worthy find it. He stood and bowed, not to the flame, but to what it represented. To Iluvatar. To the music. To the purpose that had carried him through shadow and sorrow and light. Then he turned and left the chamber. The stone rolled quietly back into place behind him. Outside, the stars were bright. The air was cool, and the wind carried the scent of the sea. Shadowfax stood nearby, ears pricked. Gandalf smiled. "Yes," he said quietly. "It is time now." They rode west, the sea not yet in view, but close. He did not rush. The world around him no longer pressed. The wind was with him, and the earth no longer held him back. The journey was almost over. But not yet. One more step remained. The sky above the western shores was a vast expanse of gentle twilight, where the last hues of the sun's light melted into the ocean's horizon. The sea itself stretched endlessly before Gandalf, calm and untroubled by the usual turmoil that accompanied the thought of departure. The ship that awaited him, the last voyage, was already docked at the edge of the bay, its hull gleaming silver under the dying light. The shores of the gray havens were quiet. There was no crowd, no hasty farewells, no tumultuous gathering of those who had come to see him off. Gandalf had not desired any of that. He had come alone. The world had known him in many forms, but in this moment, at the end of this long road, he needed no fanfare. Only the quiet embrace of the sea and sky as he crossed the threshold between worlds, as he had done many times before. He sat atop a rock near the water's edge, letting the cool wind brush against his skin, the faint scent of salt water carrying memories of ages past. He felt the weight of time, not as a burden, but as a tapestry of lived moments. The years spent in Middle-earth, the trials, the triumphs, the quiet acts of courage, the sacrifices that had shaped the world in ways no one could fully comprehend. In the distance, the ship's sails fluttered softly in the breeze, its rigging creaking gently as it waited. The crew aboard the ship, all elves, stood in silent vigil, their faces serene, their eyes fixed upon him with understanding. This was not a ship of escape, but one of passage. And though it had been waiting for a long time, Gandalf knew it would wait forever if he needed it. From behind, the faint sound of footsteps broke the silence. Gandalf turned and saw the figure of a tall elf, his hair silver as the moon, his robes woven with threads of starlight. Glorfindel, one of the greatest of the elves of Rivendell, stood before him, his eyes full of both wisdom and sorrow. "You are ready," Glorfindel said, his voice soft as a whisper. "I am," Gandalf replied. His eyes never left the horizon. He had always known this moment would come. The end of one journey, the beginning of another. The flame still burns, though its light will not be seen in this world for long. Glorfindel nodded, his expression distant, as if he too felt the deep, inevitable pull of the West. "The world has changed," Gandalf continued. "It is not the same world I arrived in. It is stronger, gentler, perhaps more uncertain, but it carries the memory of all that has passed. I have done what I could. You have done more than anyone could have asked of you, Glorfindel said. But now, it is time for you to go. Gandalf looked down at his staff, now dimming as if to match his own fading strength. The crystal atop it, once bright as the stars, now reflected only the twilight of this world, its glow muted but still present, just as his own essence had become. He had carried the flame for so long, always ready to offer light to those in need, but he could feel it now, flickering, at peace with its purpose. The ship's bell rang softly from the dock, signaling the last moments of his time in Middle-earth. The shadow is gone, Gandalf said, looking toward the shores of Middle-earth, where the world seemed to hold its breath. The world is not perfect, but it is free. Glorfindel smiled, a knowing, wistful expression. Yes, and it will continue to change. But there is no longer a place for those such as you and I. Our work is done. Gandalf stood slowly, his staff steady in his hand. The time for words was past. He had walked through millennia of change, through endless victories and defeats, through laughter and sorrow. He had been a guide, a friend, a protector, and sometimes a student of the very world he had sought to save. And now, it was time to leave it behind. Not as a memory, but as something precious that had fulfilled its purpose. He turned to face Glorfindel one last time, his face serene, the quiet acceptance of an ancient soul who had seen the patterns of time and knew that this was how it must be. The ships sail westward, Gandalf said, and the road is always open for those who seek it. For those who are brave enough to take the first step into the unknown. Glorfindel did not speak. He only nodded, a gesture of respect, and turned to walk back toward the ship. Gandalf followed slowly behind him, his steps light as if the earth itself was reluctant to let him go. The sea stretched out before them, the ripples of the water shimmering in the pale light of the evening. The soft song of the waves against the shore filled the air, and the ship's bell rang again, this time calling him to the voyage ahead. As they reached the ship, the elves aboard stood silently, their faces calm and peaceful. Gandalf felt no fear, no regret, only a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had come to understand that there were times when even the greatest of journeys must come to an end. He stepped aboard the ship, his heart heavy not with sorrow, but with the deep, unspoken gratitude that comes when one knows their path has led them to their destination. The ship was vast, its sails white like the clouds, and as Gandalf walked across the deck, he felt the breeze stir, carrying with it the faint scent of the lands beyond the sea. Beyond the mortal realm. Beyond the bounds of Middle-earth. This was a passage not just from one place to another, but from one existence to the next. As the elves aboard set the ship into motion, Gandalf looked back at the shores of Middle-earth. The land he had walked for so long, the place that had shaped him, that had given him so much, was now a distant shore. It would continue to grow, to evolve, and he would no longer be there to witness it. Yet, in his heart, he carried the knowledge that it was in good hands. The future would be bright. The ship sailed onward, its sails catching the wind, carrying Gandalf away from the shores of Middle-earth and into the endless expanse of the sea. There, in the stillness of the water, beneath the vast expanse of stars, he felt the weight of his journey settle, not as an end, but as a quiet, contented resolution. The light of the west beckoned, distant and pure. And so, with the sea and sky stretching before him, Gandalf the Grey, now Gandalf the White, closed his eyes. Not in sadness, but in peace. For the flame that had burned so brightly in him, that had been passed from the Vala to the Mare, and then to him, was not extinguished. It was simply carried forward into the great unknown where it would continue to burn. And in the hearts of those who remained, the flame would never fade. Thank you for joining me tonight. I hope this story brought you a sense of peace, a gentle reminder that all journeys, no matter how long, eventually find their end. As you settle into your bed, let your mind rest and your thoughts drift like the gentle waves of the sea. There's no rush, no worries, only the quiet comfort of the night surrounding you. Remember, you can return here whenever you need a moment of calm, a space to unwind and find peace. Until next time, take care of yourself. Let sleep find you easily, and may your dreams be soft and peaceful. Good night, and I'll see you again soon.